Important thing that I do is to establish a skull shape or a basic human head shape, okay? And that is something that's very specific. I think it's extremely important, as I'm sure you've all heard again and again, in any kind of art, to have a good grasp on anatomy, in order to really be able to create convincing artwork. It's very, very important to know anatomy very well. Okay. Okay, so very quickly, we can establish a basic head shape. Okay? Okay? Basic head shape. I mean, real basic. You can tell it's Lincoln. All right? Because I'm that good. You can tell it, right? Right? Lincoln, right? No other president. All right, I'm just kidding, it's Reagan. All right, so. Okay, so. I was once told very condescendingly by an artist, he was Japanese. He said, Jordu, you know what the best tool is, most important tool? Your hand. I was like, really? I'd already been sculpting for years. This guy was younger than me. And I was like, hey, thanks. Okay, now, the next step is to start getting more specific and making it a skull, okay? So, the first thing you want to do is build out that muzzle area just a bit, okay? You want to build in where the jawline is. It's important to remember that the chin drops back behind the nose. It doesn't, a lot of people, I see a lot of beginning sculptors making the chin come out as far as the nose, and it really doesn't. I mean, unless you're hideously ugly, like just something went wrong in the womb and you are fucked, okay? Generally speaking, the chin is going to drop back, okay? Time for the glasses. Oh! Okay. Now I want to watch symmetry even at this early stage. I'm going to just be very conscientious of symmetry. Okay. Okay. Next is to build out the brow a bit and the forehead. Now, one thing that is crucial to remember, and I want to stress this, because this is one of the biggest mistakes I see in early sculptors, okay? Not early, like Michelangelo. I mean, beginning sculptors. The forehead is not flat. The face is not flat. The face is not on a single plane. Think of the head more as an egg. The head is more like an egg than it is a block. It's not square at all. It's like an egg. It's a continuous curve. Okay? Thus, the forehead specifically is very curved. It's a semicircle. It is not this flat plane that people seem to think it is. Okay? So it's extremely important to keep that in mind. All right? So, as I sculpt the forehead, I'm keeping all that roundness in mind. Another thing, which I'm sure many of you guys have heard before, the eyes come halfway down the head. So about here. Now we can establish the beginnings of a nose here. Is that noise? Downright creepy. There's something in the walls. You can't escape it. And if you see it, you will go mad. Okay, so now I'm going to establish the cheekbones. And those are very strong forms. What's up, brother? It's my buddy Mike Fontaine. I've known him since he was a little kid. He's one of the best sculptors I know. I see. Okay. So, as you establish a cheekbone, remember it's not just a shape that's in the front. It's a shape that runs all the way back. What's called the zygomatic process. This whole thing, this ball here, goes straight back and creates a little bit of a lift in the form here. You know, it's not really extreme. It's subtle. You can see it on most people, unless you're a fat fuck like me. Also the sides of the eyes. This is another thing I see people getting wrong all the time and making their faces too flat. The outer corners of the socket are much further back than the inner side of the socket. See what I mean as I rotate it? The outside of the eyes are kind of angled like this. And in fact, a strange little fact, and this comes in handy for anyone making fake heads or anything like that. The eyeballs themselves are not perfectly aligned straight. They're about 5 degrees wall-eyed. I mean, unless you see somebody who's like cross-eyed or something. Generally speaking, the eyes are 5% wall-eyed. Which is why sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes you're making a fake head, and from the 3/4 it looks cross-eyed because the nose is in the way. You ever seen that? And you're like, what is wrong? Their eyes are aligned perfectly. That's because the eyes are actually just a little bit out. Okay? Okay, so let's bring out the muzzle maybe a little further. Let's see. Okay? So we've got the beginnings of a human face. It's now recognizable clearly as a human face, a dog or a cat or a sheep. Why is it that was such anger? As if someone says, that looks like a sheep to you. It's not a sheep. But you see how even the very beginning shapes that I laid down, those being sound is very important. really think it's best, as you establish a neck, to kind of just create more or less a tube, and then you would sculpt your anatomy into that tube, as opposed to trying to lay separate muscles. Now, I'm a little different than some sculptors in that I kind of, I don't approach things in quite the same academic way that some sculptors do, and it's not that I'm right and they're wrong, it's just how I kind of do it. For instance, I taught an impromptu class in Italy, of all places, which is like the cradle of sculpture, where great sculpture lives all day. And I was at a school where the students were learning to sculpt likenesses. And what they would do is have the model sit and with little balls of clay.
Which school is this?
It was in Florence.
I studied in Florence.
Yeah?
Not the Florence Academy of Art, is it?
I think that's what it was.
There's several academies there.
I think
Classical style academies.
Well, it was one of them.
Were there a bunch of Brits?
No.
That would be Charles Cecil.
No. But I think it was the Florence Academy.
Okay, Americans though, right?
From all over the world.
Okay.
Australia,
Sweden,
Spain, France. But they would establish with balls of clay the profile, and they'd get that nailed. But then the profile literally was this much clay. And then gradually they'd build out one side with balls of clay. This would take weeks. Balls of clay slowly to the side, and then match the other side, and then kind of bring the likeness together. And it would take, months to finish a likeness. And they asked me to do a demonstration. I was just there visiting with my wife, and I was like, oh my God, yes. I'd love to. Are you kidding? Sculpt in Italy? So I just, with wet clay, just did what I'm doing now. Did what I'm doing now. And the students were, but how can you? Wait, no. And in fact, I heard later that one of the instructors said what he did was sculpt a head he's obviously sculpted many times before. Because that's not possible. And we do it every day in LA. Every day, And in the realm that I'm in, which is creature design and makeup effects and all that sort of thing, this is nothing magical. I may be a little faster than some sculptors, but it's not rocket science. And there's a very different, and I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong, but it is a bit of a disservice to make it sound as if I've cheated somehow. I've probably been doing this every bit as long as those teachers, and I thought it was kind of like insulting and flattering at the same time. Well, obviously, he could not possibly. It's not possible. Humans can't do that. Yes, they can, and I'm far from the only one who can.
Do you have any comments about shapes from above?
You mean looking at it from?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think it's a good idea to look down on your piece and make sure that it's got that kind of human head at least has this kind of egg-like shape, and it's surprisingly pointy in the front. Surprisingly.
So if you were doing a portrait sculpture of someone specific, working with a model from life or photograph, what would your approach be as compared to?
It'll be very similar, you know. I start off by just looking at the photos and doing what I can to get a general likeness, just completely, you know, by eye. But then I start employing certain techniques to nail the likeness. There's one that's probably been around since antiquity, and one that obviously is quite modern. The one that's been around for, I think, probably a long time is you take a pane of glass, or, I mean, pane of glass is the best because it's going to stay absolutely flat, and you smash it against your head. And what that allows you to do, I'm just kidding, clears your mind, it helps you really focus on the work. Blood's running down your face, you contemplate life itself. Puts you in a deep space, you just can think. No. You take a pane of glass or a very thick piece of, you know, very clear plastic, and you take your favorite photo of the person, or not even your favorite, a photo of the expression you want. Hopefully you can find one on the internet. I mean, if it's someone really famous like fucking Johnny Depp or one of these assholes, you can find it easily of them posing like, hi, I'm great. Take that photo, and then small, you want it fairly small. The head should be about that big. And you trace it onto the glass or the acetate. And it should be a fairly small piece of plastic or whatever. And then you can use that to line up to your sculpture and see where everything's off, okay? That'll get you pretty far. But the one that really nails it and helps you to get a hyper likeness is taking a photo of your sculpture as close to, now you obviously don't know focal length of the idiot who took the photos in the first place, but you do your best to match the angle of your favorite photos, whether it be profile, three-quarter, head-on. If you can find all three of those, you're golden, and you should also have those traced on your acetate to see. But you then put those into Photoshop of your sculpture. And you create a new layer, and you outline in red your sculpture, where the ears are, where the eyes are, the mouth, the nose, the nasolabial lines, every part of your sculpture, not fine lines necessarily, but overall structure. Faintly paint in where this is, okay? Then you turn those two layers off and you have now your photo of the actor. Create another layer and you draw in blue the actor or actress or whoever the fuck it is. Draw them out perfectly, okay? Don't fudge it. Do it exactly accurate to where their line is, all their jawline, where their eyes are, even where their gaze is. And then you turn both photos off, with creating a white background on another layer maybe. And you will clearly see. And then you flatten that image, you print it out, and wherever the red is and the blue don't turn purple, aren't lined up, you're not right. That is huge, hugely helpful. Okay? And from there, you just look and go, the eye is too low. The nose is a little off. The lip's not quite the right shape. And you can keep going back and forth like that, but usually after you do that, you're real close. Okay? But a lot of it also is just the art of it. Establishing a convincing expression. I also always think that when doing eyes in a sculpture, whether it just be a clay thing or whether it be a full silicone head with false eyes and all this, you usually want to turn the gaze slightly to the side. Very rarely is the head going to be convincing if the eyes are straight ahead. Even if you turn the head. You usually want to turn the head, you almost never want it like this. You want there to be a slight turn, and the eyes should be, I think, focused slightly to the side. I think that gives it a tremendous amount of life. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. down here. It's also important in busts to make sure that the chest is somewhat proud. That means coming out. Okay? It shouldn't be flat and lining up with the neck. It's almost like the neck is a tube that sits on kind of a strangely shaped box. You know, and then the collarbone from here, boom, still comes out at an angle. You learn a lot in Florence, I'll bet.
It's a different world. It's true, it's really different kind of technique. Yeah. The problem is that because it takes so long, sometimes it just gets stiff. So that's the major negative. But you really do, study it well,
I'll bet.
so positives and
It's no
negatives.
joke.
Yeah.
I still respect the hell out of anyone that can teach in Italy. It's fucking crazy. You're constantly humbled there. You know what I mean? You walk around for 2 seconds, you're like, oh, right, I suck. I forgot. For a second, that was good. Another thing to keep in mind is that anatomy, I mean, unless they're a bodybuilder or something weird, anatomy is very subtle, very subtle. And I think that should reflect in sculpture. I was at the Musée d'Orsay once. Howdy. And there was a sculpture of a woman sort of leaning over. And it was out of marble, you know, it's way better than anything I'll ever do. And I was just looking at it going, yeah, it's great. It's, oh my God. And in one angle of the light, I could see the subtlest description of ribs in her back. It was only visible in one angle of light. Otherwise, it looked smooth. But it just makes me feel so stupid. What am I doing? Monster shit.
When you're doing effects makeup, sculpture really is always additive, like as building. You take away as you're taking away from your fingers, but really conceptually it's building up. Whereas if you're going to sculpt a piece of marble, it's like take everything away that's not that old woman. You know, do you find a different headset?
What do you mean?
Carving versus clay sculpting as you're doing now? Do you carve? I mean, if I were given a piece of, I believe as an effects artist I could sculpt in this manner pretty well, but if I was given a piece of marble and they said take away everything that isn't that thing you wanted there, I'd probably have a hard time.
Well, yeah. Me too. I mean, carving out of marble or any kind of stone or wood, that's what Michelangelo and Bernini and these guys, that's actual sculpting. This is called modeling. You know, we call it sculpture as a shorthand, but technically, according to the Renaissance masters, this is modeling. You know, to me, I understand the mechanics of sculpting in marble. You start off with a chisel. They even had rakes, just like we do for clay. And somehow or other, they figured out some kind of rudimentary sandpaper. I don't know how, but they did. Because obviously, there are areas on these sculptures that are smooth. I mean, the Daphne and Apollo, you know, I mean, it's just all, you know what I mean. So we know mechanically, generally, how it was done, but I've seen things I have no idea how they did it. I have no idea. There are sculptures by French artists, a little bit after the Renaissance, that are skeletons covered in nets out of marble. Skeletons with nets that you can see the skeleton through the net. I don't know. I don't know. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's a skeleton with like fishnet
Yep.
coming off of it in marble.
Yep. But covering it, like I've seen
Yeah.
it on the whole, and you can see the skeleton in the net, like, huh?
It seems impossible.
It does.
They use hand drills. It's called a violin in Italian. And typically you get a 13-year-old boy to constantly pull on the string. And because it's in America it's called a bow drill. But it's a manual. Because it's manual, it doesn't burn the crystals of the marble. So you can, plus the way the marble is mined back then is very different from now because of the dynamite, which will cause micro fissures to, you know, break up the stone. But they would, you know, cut it slowly with sand and water, and I think metal wire. So you gotta really take care of the stone from the beginning, and then as you're carving, you have to use certain tools that don't go so fast that they burn the crystals or cause microfractures through vibration.
I gotta study in fucking Italy, man. Jordu, I don't know how they do this. I do. I actually know. God damn.
Jordu, when you sculpt, do you try to enhance highlights by making forms bigger? Or try to create more recesses, or do you try to go for a literal surface for your sculptures?
Well, I mean, I suppose that just by default, because I was raised with, you know, looking at monster movies, you know, I think that my tendency is to exaggerate form a bit. Now, when it comes to doing likenesses, you know, which I've done, those have to be obviously much subtler. When it comes to monster work, I think I really do try to do everything I do in as realistic a way as I can, but it still has an edge of stylization to it. It's almost impossible to avoid. But in a way, I don't know that that's a bad thing for fantasy art, which is my primary interest. You know, yes, of course, I love, you know, hyperrealism and that sort of thing, and it's fun to do a likeness, but imagination has always been my focus. Creating fantastic creatures and characters. That's so much more interesting to me than like the gory stuff or, you know, likeness makeups and stuff. I think those things are amazing when people can do them really well. But I got into this because I like monster shit, and that's what I really want to do. I like fantasy monsters. Maybe that makes me juvenile, I don't know. Huh? I remember when I was about 14, I went to Performing Arts High School in Philadelphia, and I majored in drama, but I really wanted to do this stuff, you know. I mean, I loved acting, and I did it for years, but I was really, really, really interested in monster shit, too. And so at lunch, I would wander down to the sculpture area. Our teacher, his name was Mr. Marvin, he was a great guy. And he would allow me to come down there and play around and make what I wanted. And I remember once I was in there, and I said, I want to sculpt a head, Mr. Marvin. I'm going to sculpt a head. That's exactly how I sounded before. I said, I want to sculpt a head. And he was like, okay, what is it you want to make? And I said, I don't know, something that's kind of like, I don't know, subhuman. And there was this girl who was a senior who was very talented. She made these little figures out of ceramic clay and then made this little street scene out of clay with these little cobblestones. And she was very good. But I said, yeah, I want to make something kind of subhuman. And across the room, this girl. For some reason, her kind of dismissive, stupid kid. I'm just showing my work now. What are you doing, Karen? How's that insurance selling? Probably married a millionaire. But yeah, I remember that. It's funny the things you never forget, never let go of, because I remember thinking, someday I'll show you. Anyway, she'd probably laugh at this too. What an asshole, though. Why'd you have to laugh at my idea? I mean, at least you use the term subhuman instead of a monster, a comic character.
Jordu, when you're talking about the profile, the diamond shape on the profile from the chin up to the head, you said it was only one video. You try to keep that.
You're not live in that video. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Just ask her. I don't know what I'm doing. It's not even Italy.
I don't know anything.
She's like, this guy's a
I
fucking
don't know
asshole.
anything. We're here to see you.
No, what are you saying now?
You were saying about like on the human head, you know, you try to keep that diamond shape from the nose down to the chin, come back, and then, yeah, it's like a diamond shape.
Did I?
Yeah, you said that in a lot in the video. I was watching.
Okay. I say a lot of bullshit.
But I'm just wondering, then you go and make like a long-headed alien, and yet you break those rules, it seems, you know. It just,
Right.
you know, I was just wondering, like, how do you do that? How do you come from like something that's supposed to be, you look at everybody here, everybody has that pretty much, you know, the diamond shape in their face.
Oh,
but yet-
that,
Yeah.
oh,
What do
okay.
right now.
You're talking about the profile.
Yeah, the profile, like you're here.
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
diamond
yeah, yeah.
here, but yet you make your creatures and then you like break that, you kind of break that habit, but like you're straight faced.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, I certainly don't want to come off sounding like, but it's knowing the rules well enough to break them. You know? And there is a certain, once you've designed creatures for long enough, and you've paid enough attention to nature, you start to be able to crack nature's code in design. Nature has a style. It is a perfect style. It's a style no one will ever master. Not Michelangelo, nobody. There's never been anyone that has managed to completely crack that code. And I don't think there ever will be, because no artist can sculpt cells. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's starting to sound like an intelligent design class. It's not. But the fact of the matter is that nature is perfect, and we're only mimicking it. But if you're good enough and you pay enough attention, you can start to mimic it convincingly. Convincingly enough that it will fool the average person into thinking that's a real head or that's a real thing. For me, it's making a creature that seems like it grew from nature. You know, the folds of the skin, the weight, the areas of rest, all of the parts of it feel like nature made it. And that is what all realistic artists are after. Every single one. Even Rodin, who sculpted very stylistically, was still after that sense of, oh yes, oh yes. I was on Facebook recently, a place no one should ever go, and somebody had posted a picture of the helmet maker's beautiful wife, which is a famous Rodin sculpture of an old woman. And the title tells you the story, and the sculpture tells you the story. It's an astounding piece of art. It's very stylized. Some guy, some digital ZBrush fucko, got on there and said, I never could appreciate this kind of art. What do you see so beautiful about it? My hands were shaking as I went to the keyboard. Oh, this is a golden opportunity. Now, I didn't tell him off or yell at him, but I said, if you don't, at the end of my long diatribe, I said, if you don't see what's beautiful about this, you perhaps need to return to the basics of what makes art incredible. You know, the stylization is the point. Oh my God, I was so angry. And sure enough, I checked on his page, a bunch of digital ZBrush knights and dragons and all this crap. It's like, if you don't see the magic of the Burghers of Calais or any of the stuff that Rodin or any number of other, I'm not talking about people who paint like squares on a canvas or shit. I'm talking about, you know, representational art that's stylized, you know, and it's done well. If you don't, I can't. I won't try. When I commented, a bunch of other people commented. Did you see that thread? When I commented, a bunch of other people commented, but they were all very nice about it. Well, maybe you should check out blah, blah, blah. I pointed this guy to the gates of hell. I said, no, not the literal gates of hell. I mean Rodin's Gates of Hell, for which he sculpted the thinker. It was a never finished piece, but he did the thinker at the base of it. It's an unbelievable thing. If you haven't seen Rodin's Gates of Hell, look that shit up. That is sculpture, period. You know, but that was a frustrating moment in my life. like stupid, you know. Doesn't fly with me, you know. But he said it in a real disdainful way.
What do you think so beautiful about this? I never appreciate this.
Probably hiding. Tonight, have an axe wound in the face. Okay, so I'm starting to build more flesh on the face here. I keep forgetting to rotate it here. There's plenty of chairs, guys, if you want to sit, hang out for a little bit. There are chairs everywhere, or not. Don't do it. Stand there all uncomfortable and weird. I don't care. Be creepy, make me upset, make me unhappy, make me miserable.
Now that you're laying flesh on the bone, are you starting to think about muscle movement and the expression that,
Not yet. Right now I'm just trying to get more of a mechanical, you know, just a face. Something, I'm trying to make an individual right now. To me, that's more important right now.
Jordu, are you designing it as you go, or have you thought about something?
No, I'm designing as I go. I don't have any. That's one of the things that makes these demonstrations rather stressful. Really don't think about what I'm doing. I just kind of do it. But in a way, the spontaneity of it is something that sometimes makes it better, you know. I tend, for instance, to not be nearly as interested in sculpture projects where everything's been designed out already, you know. We want this, and I'm just a pair of hands. You know, when I get the opportunity to read into a rough design, that is very interesting. All right, so I'm going to do something radical to it, just kind of change it around a little bit. I'm going to take this lower jaw, and I'm going to slice it off. Then I'm going to slice into it again, take some extra away, and I'm going to put this back in to give it a weaker jaw.
Wow.
And you can see what that does into the character. Starts giving it a somewhat more interesting and unique look. One thing that when I'm designing a creature or character, to me, it's always important to design it as if you're sculpting an individual. You don't want to do something that feels like it's one of many in a way. You want to do something that has its own, because that's one of the things that makes us fascinated by the human face. Every one of you is individual, except you. You just look like everybody. It's not true, obviously. I just chose you at random because it seemed like, yeah. But everyone looks so different. Within the confines of 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, we identify each other primarily by this much flesh. Just by this. Yes, we can tell who we are by our movements, and our body, but you plenty of times gone to say, hey, Jim, oh, fuck, sorry, dude, I thought you were sorry, I spilled my hair. You don't have to laugh, by the way, none of these are that funny anyway. I don't care, because I'm going back to LA anyway. Okay. Pete, no? No? Pete, right? Peter.
You remember my name?
Yeah. I think we're friends on Facebook, aren't we?
Probably not.
What's your name?
Peter?
Peter.
Luca?
Yeah, I know your name at the very least. You're an artist, right?
To a certain extent.
Are you a professional?
To a certain extent.
What do you do?
I work for a Halloween production company.
Called what?
The Glow?
Huh?
The Glow?
And what do they do?
It's a jack-o'-lantern trail that, does a bunch of
I'm telling you, I know your name. I do. I mean, I've done a lot of work in the Halloween industry, maybe that's how. I don't know, sorry, Pete. What's up, brother?
Just want to say hi, I missed you in LA.
What's up, Anthony?
Hey, got it okay?
I did.
Okay, I actually had more work to do, just want to say hi.
I'm just kidding, my plane crashed and I died. It didn't actually.
All right, take care.
All right, man.
How's the movie going? I just want to say.
Well, it's going. I mean, there's a lot of effects work to do.
All
We
right.
shot the principal actors.
All right, hopefully I see you in September?
Absolutely.
Okay, take care.
Bye, Anthony. That's Anthony. Did you guys figure that out? Okay, now let's do a little character. Would someone do me a favor? You're gonna hold this head. Alright, good. Alright. So you see that starts to give it a little more character, you know? I'm gonna tilt the head down a little bit more though. Mike number 2 couldn't come?
I think he's going to.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Yay, yay.
Yeah, I think he's on his way.
Oh, that's awesome. Mike and Mike, why can't I remember his last name? That's retarded.
Marino.
Mike Marino run the best prosthetics company on the East Coast. It's called ProRen, Prosthetic Renaissance. And they're across the Hudson there in Jersey. And the work they do is mind-boggling. It's superb. They've life casted everyone from Natalie Portman to, I don't know, who else? I know you did, what's her name? Fucking, what's that chick? White, Scarlett Johansson. Like,
Yeah.
Well, that chick.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever. These movies are all the same.
Yeah.
There was, and did you do Benedict Cumberbatch?
No.
No?
We did Kevin Spacey on Wednesday.
Really?
Cool.
Oh, we did Kevin Spacey.
I love
on
House
that.
of Cards.
Really? What was he like? Was he strange?
He was great.
Oh, that's cool.
He was really cool.
Do you know this guy Vincent something or other? He's working on Paul Giamatti right now out here or something. He did a beautiful ball cap on it. It's online. Incredible.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't he already bald?
Well, no, not completely. Isn't he already bald? I like the tentative way you asked that.
Vincent. Not Vincent Van Dyke.
No, Vincent Schiapi or
Yeah, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he posted it recently. I thought it was gorgeous. Gorgeous work. What time do we have?
5 o'clock.
Awesome.
What's the name of the makeup artist who did Gerard Depardieu for Cyrano de Bergerac? And somebody said after that movie was over, when she won the Academy Award, amazing, she wins the Academy Award for putting a big ugly nose on a guy with a big ugly nose.
I have no
I
idea.
don't know it, but that's funny.
You keep in touch with Greg Cannon?
Yeah, we just saw him at Monster Palooza.
Oh, okay.
Hung out with him for a while. And,
Greg recently helped me out on the makeup I'm doing.
Oh, really?
I actually was going to contact you guys, but you're so fucking far away. I thought, what's the point?
Yeah, so
I really wish you guys lived closer, man. I'd probably just put you in charge of this makeup.
for the film, or?
No, it's not for the film. It's for something else, but it's, oh my god, what a drag.
What, can you say what it is?
I can, I shouldn't, but I don't think anyone's here who gives a shit. It's a likeness makeup of Ronald Reagan
Oh, great.
for the Ronald Reagan Library.
Sick.
Well, I think the route we're gonna go though is I'm gonna do a silicone head of him that's like hyper real, and we might do it digitally because the makeup is just, this guy's face is just not right. He does not look like Ronald Reagan.
Great. I mean, it's impossible. You know.
It's impossible to make it look as much like him as they want. They want it to be spot on, look exact like.
They always do. and they
Like you
never
can't
understand
tell the
it.
difference between this guy and I'm like, that's not gonna happen. Like I don't know how else to tell you guys that.
Right.
You're like it's gotta be him from 1980.
Yeah, we just did a likeness makeup in Korea, and explaining to them that it's not going to look exact was really difficult. They thought it was
Well, especially in Korean.
yeah, translating.
No, but I think these people really do think that it's just, of course it's possible. It's like Rick Baker couldn't pull this off, guys. Like nobody could do this.
Well, we did a test and then we clay pressed it and almost completely resculpted it, and then did it again, and the second one was much closer. Because with the makeup, there's just stuff you can't anticipate how it's going to move until you do it a second time.
Absolutely.
Change it up. And then we actually did a few more clay presses the third time.
Jesus, you did 3 makeups of it?
Yeah.
They ain't paying me enough to do that shit. You've got the dough though, man. It's the Reagan Foundation. You've got all kinds of crazy. Trickle down economic money. No, I'm saying. Oh, trickle down to us, the rich people. Isn't that weird?
So did Greg sculpt it?
No, Greg didn't sculpt it. I'm sculpting it. But I went to Greg's. This motherfucker lives past Palm Springs. I drove for years to get to his place. Years. I was 12 when I started my drive. Now I'm 50. So, no, it was like over 3 hours. I get there, Palm Springs is hot as fuck, and where he lives is even worse, La Quinta. So I drove to La Quinta and I brought this melting thing to him, and I was like, okay, Greg, what can you do? And he's like, oh my god, this is just all, no. It's just like, you need to build this board, and he showed me a lot of important stuff, and he did help me a great deal. It's never, he said though, this is an almost impossible task, to make it look that much like,
His face is that wrong. Why don't they just get a better guy?
Would you believe that we searched high and low, everywhere, YouTube, putting out casting calls, everything we could, to try to find somebody who looked more like the Gipper, and we couldn't. We just couldn't. There was one guy who's like one of the more famous impersonators of him. He sucks at it and doesn't look like it. And this guy's like a real well-known impersonator. He blows. I couldn't believe it. This guy? I don't know.
The hardest thing is, like you were saying before, the distance between the eyes that you just can't change. That makes such a difference
Well,
in life.
here's the real difficult part. Ronald Reagan had very specific heavy folds over his eye that really were pronounced.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that gave him that kind of slightly cruel look he always had. But, well, it's probably there anyway, but, he had this kind of fat pad here. This guy's eyes are, some of those eyes that are hollow, like they go back in, instead of like, there's no fat here.
Right.
So, to do that, I'd have to sculpt it way up, and that's not gonna sculpt the fat pad in and build it up a lot, and you can't have this stiff fat pad there in a silicone makeup.
I have to see it, because we had that same problem with this makeup. The actor had really wide eyes, and the character had very, you know, very squinted eyes. So, like mean-looking eyes. So I sculpted lids that I didn't think would work. This will never work. They're way too heavy. You won't be able to open his eyes.
Okay, and it worked?
Because we deadened the silicone so soft.
Well, maybe, but even still, it would be built out so much that it won't hit his eye. Like, Ronald Reagan's eyes simply were further out.
Yeah.
This is real deep on him. It's a mess. It's a mess. Well, I guess it's going to be back to the drawing board. I don't know what I'm doing.
Do they ever light castrate in there?
Not that I know.
At least you had the opportunity to be involved in the casting of the project, which is higher up you get.
No, I was very fortunate.